Hi guys, welcome to English Lesson 1. I've put this lesson together as a starter. I thought we'd go with Macbeth because it's new for all of us to learn this way, for me to be recording lessons and for you to be doing it remotely, where Macbeth is a nice place to start. I have also created this lesson for Year 10 and 11 because you're both working on Macbeth, so it makes sense to set the same work for both of you as a starting point. And I'm conscious that I'm setting this for students who I haven't taught before. So although some of you will know that there's a way I do things and a way of working, some of you won't. So I've started right at the beginning of the process. Some of you may feel once you start this video that you don't need to follow it all through because you're a bit further on the process than this. But as the lessons progress, it'll be less of me talking and doing and more of you practicing and applying. Okay, so as we would in school, we're going to start with a task which allows you to try and retrieve learning things you've learned before, to consolidate knowledge of content that will help you with later bits of this lesson. So on the screen are 12 questions about Macbeth. All I ask that you do, please, is to pause the video now to get your piece of pen and paper and to answer the questions, please. Okay, hopefully you've found that quite okay and you've managed to do that bit of it. On the screen now are some answers that I have prepared for them. Now, as you know with Macbeth and with literature generally, there aren't definitive answers, so yours are likely to vary slightly. But they're a good guide to what I've taught you and what sorts of things I would expect you to come up with. So if you just check your answers against mine, and obviously if there are any questions that you couldn't do, then you can obviously have a read through what I have written. So pause the video again for a few moments to compare your answers and to check the ones you were unsure about. Great, what I suggest you do at this stage is some proactive revision work. So if you pause the video, but actually spend a little bit of time putting those questions onto flashcards, particularly if there were questions you struggled to answer, it's really worthwhile to create flashcards. Question on the front, answer on the back, and then in 2 days' time, 3 days' time, a week's time, you can test yourself on those questions and try to ensure that you start to remember that key information that's important to the play. I also recommend the Quizlet website if you don't have flashcards at home and you'd prefer to create electronic flashcards. Quizlet is great. It's really easy to use. You'll work it out really quickly how it works. I think there's an app for your phone and you can create the questions and answers and test yourself that way. So if you could just pause the video and create a revision resource and come back to the video once you've done that, I think that'd be really useful. Okay, moving on then. The next thing I'd like to look at a little bit is quotation memorisation. It isn't essential to know massive chunks of the text off by heart. There's not very many marks available for that kind of thing, but actually developing lines of analysis requires you to know some text. You can't analyse the creation of meaning without being able to refer to the text directly or indirectly. So I think it's a really valuable thing to do, a really valuable knowledge bank to have, to memorise some key lines from the play. And there's a really simple approach to doing this. It's the way I always used to memorise chunks of literature, which is through repetition and then testing. I've chosen a really straightforward quotation for this because so you can practice the process. So, full of scorpions is my mind. Hopefully you will remember this line. It is shortly before the murder of Banquo. Macbeth has already organised his murder and is just talking to Lady Macbeth about his state of mind, really. He doesn't share with her. Okay, these videos will have dogs barking in the background on them, so apologies. Okay, so he doesn't share with her what he's intending to do, but he reveals insights into his state of mind through this line. So what I'd like you to do is just to pause the video for 60 seconds, and in that time to repeat the line either loudly or in your mind as many times as you can in the time frame. Now that you have repeated the line several times to yourself, the process is to gradually remove words from the line and practice saying the quotation again with initially only one word missing, and then with more than one word missing, eventually so all of the words are missing. And to repeat the process in spaced intervals over time until you memorise the line. So you can, wherever you are, say the missing word aloud, please. Excellent. Perfect. And then if we move on to the next bit, you can see I've taken 2 words out. So if you could say the line aloud by adding the missing words. Brilliant job. And finally, if you could say the whole line aloud from memory. Great. Okay, so I know most of you probably already knew that line because it's really memorable and it's a really high value line in the sense that there's lots to say about it and it's relevant to lots of different potential exam questions. But that process becomes more valuable with harder, longer textual details. And if you use it regularly over time, you'll be surprised how much you can remember. Okay, next stage then is some sentence level practice. Being good at writing an essay is really, really hard. Essays take a huge amount of cognitive resources, i.e. our brains have to think about a lot all in one go. Whereas if you practice writing short units and build that up over time, you can internalise the process and make it much easier for yourself. So you can concentrate when you're writing an essay on saying really clever stuff rather than on the fundamental process of how to write an essay. So writing about authorial intent is really important in literature to understand that Macbeth as a character is a fictional construct. He doesn't exist, and in a sense, beyond entertainment, it doesn't matter what he does. What matters is what he represents about the human experience. And really, Shakespeare as a writer is the most effective or one of the most powerful writers at capturing some things about what it is to be human and our place in society. So I always teach my classes, and students who've been taught by me will know this process, that when we write about details in literature and details in Macbeth, we always have to try and think bigger than the characters and what they do, and think about what they represent and what bigger messages we can take from that. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the sentence parameters, or this kind of structure that we use to build a sentence. So we always start with a tentative phrase. We cannot ask Shakespeare what he intended to do. All we can do is draw conclusions from the evidence in the text. So a tentative phrase is just a way of phrasing a sentence that shows we're not 100% sure. Perhaps, it seems that, it could be interpreted that. All of those are tentative phrases. We then, if we're writing an authorial intent sentence, we always use the author's surname. And we always talk about something they do, something they use. And what they use could be a character, it could be a line from the play, it could be a specific event. But we always try to relate intent to a specific thing that's in the text. The next one then, an intent verb. The verb shows is banned. I hate it. I never let my students use it. Only because it leads people to write fairly basic and non-developed things. So instead we can use words like warns, criticises, explores, reveals, creates an insight into. Any phrasing that allows us to dig a bit deeper than just shows, I think creates a more academic phrasing. And then finally, we can say what he actually does. We can evaluate it in terms of what he thinks he's doing. Okay, I think all of that will make more sense if I produce an example on the screen for you. So I'm specifically going to write about Macbeth nihilism and how and why Shakespeare perhaps presents Macbeth in this nihilistic way at the end. So let's make the font a little bit bigger. I'm going to start with a tentative phrase. So I'm just going to start with a nice simple ones. Don't need that capital. It seems that. So I'm immediately showing that I understand that this is open to interpretation, but this is my view. Next one's easy then. I have the author's surname, which in this case is Shakespeare. Shakespeare needs an E on the end and he needs a capital S, so please remember that. Then we can say what he uses. Well, that's easy because we're writing about Macbeth's nihilism. So uses Macbeth's nihilism. 2. So far, I've got the beginnings of the sentence. It seems that Shakespeare uses Macbeth's nihilism. Although actually I've missed the S, haven't I? So let's put that on. Now I can obviously make that evaluative statement about what I think he does. The nihilism of Macbeth seems to be a warning, I would say, to the audience of the dangers of ruthlessly pursuing power without moral integrity. Because Macbeth's nihilism stems from that. He's lost everything he values in life because of the path he chose. So I think in this case, warn is a really good verb to choose. So it seems that Shakespeare uses Macbeth nihilism to warn the audience of the terrible consequences suffered if you choose to ruthlessly pursue power without moral boundaries. Okay, so obviously it can work. We can work on it over time. We can improve it. But as a starting point for an intent sentence, it shows we're thinking bigger than Macbeth. We're thinking about not just him as a nihilistic character in Act 5, but why and Shakespeare may have done that. It seems that Shakespeare uses Macbeth's nihilism to warn the audience of the terrible consequences suffered if you choose to ruthlessly pursue power without moral boundaries. And it's worth noting this sentence would probably come at the end of an analytical paragraph. So within context, it would make more sense because it would be building on something you had already said. Okay, so can you now pause the video again and have a practice at applying this yourself? So can you have a practice at writing a sentence about Lady Macbeth's suicide and thinking about why Shakespeare included that suicide at the end, or the death of Lady Macbeth, which we assume is a suicide, okay? So remember to do it the same way I did with the tentative phrase, the author's surname, uses intent verb evaluation. So pause the video now, please, to do that. Okay, well done. Obviously, if you would like to email me your sentence, you obviously can, and I'll have a quick look at it, but don't feel that you have to at this stage. I'll ask you to email me work once we've done something that's a little bit more sustained. So just quickly then to finish this off, perhaps you wrote something along the lines of, it seems that, so you've got your tentative phrase, Shakespeare, and I know that all of you would have ensured you had your capital S at the beginning and your E on the end, uses Lady Macbeth's suicide to, and then with Lady Macbeth's suicide, very similar to Macbeth's nihilism, isn't it? It seems to be a warning of the destructive consequences of evil acts. So we can again use a similar verb, warn, can't we? To warn the audience of the destructive consequences of evil choices. Yours is likely slightly different, but fundamentally, as long as we've considered what Shakespeare does, but also we're trying to think bigger about why, then we're on the right track. Okay, so that's the end of this first lesson. We've done some retrieval work, some memorisation work. Lesson 2 will be then trying to apply some of this to the exam. Thanks very much for today, guys.